Degsie's All-Time Runners, a short story by Janet H Swinney. Instalment 2. On this particular morning, when Degsie shoved his head through the cat flap in the UPVC door and wriggled into her house, Peggy was already in the kitchen at work with the can opener. He sprinted towards her and wound himself in figure eights around her stick-like legs. "Why, hello, Samson. Is it a nasty day out there? You're all wet. I hope you've not messed up my stockings, mind." Peggy manoeuvred some fishy substance into a tin bowl for him with a fork and placed it on the floor. Degsie eyed it critically. Bog standard fare and a modest portion, but it would do to be going on with. If he made a racket afterwards, he might get some biscuits. After breakfast, he crept up onto the back of an armchair. He closed one eye and, with the other, watched Peggy feeling her way round the room. She was forever tidying up, wiping down surfaces and wringing out cloths, smoothing out runners and plumping up cushions. She even polished the television screen regularly, though she could barely see it. Today he watched her folding away tea towels that had been drying in front of the fire, a tartan one with writing in the middle, and another with a red striped border. He was woken from his dozing by the electronic beeper. Peggy was sitting in the chair beneath him. He could see pink avenues of scalp between the tight white bales of her hair. She sat bolt upright. "Aye, time for the nurse, Samson." She got up and turned the knob on the gas fire up several notches. "I didn't want her to think I'm starving in here." In due course the nurse arrived. It wasn't the usual woman, thin Pam, with the cold shake in her hands, who pretended she didn't smoke. It was a short, plump woman with dark hair and a bossy manner. Her glance scoured the living room. Degsie took an immediate dislike to her. He moved swiftly to the armchair opposite Peggy's and flattened himself into the cushion. "Have you got a clean towel for Nursey?" "Aye, top left-hand drawer." The nurse went to the sideboard and pulled out a towel. "Your man, Mrs. Blake?" She nodded at a framed photograph that stood on a crocheted mat. "Aye, that's our Ernie. Been gone a long time now, and all the bairns are moved away." The nurse spread the towel over her knees, propped up one of Peggy's legs, and began changing the dressing. Degsie averted his gaze. He didn't care for the smells either of the wound, the dressing, or the lubricant on the nurse's latex gloves. The nurse worked briskly. She kept up a stream of small talk about people and places Peggy didn't know, and trotted out admonishments that she was too old to need. "Now, no scratching, and no fiddling with the safety pins." Once both legs were dressed and Peggy's stockings had been hoisted again, the nurse peeled off her gloves. She made a few notes on a chart and popped it back into her bag. "And who's this?" she said, her eye falling belatedly on Degsie. "Who do you fucking think it is?" purred Degsie. "Sandy Claus?" The nurse looked at him sourly. "Aye, that's our Samson." "I won't stroke him. I'd have to wash me hands again." "Please your fucking sell." Degsie stretched his lips over his teeth to show that any advance would be unwelcome anyway. After the nurse had gone, the two of them sat and looked at the fire for a long time. "To tell you the truth, Samson, I think she's getting one of these on a bit too tight." Peggy twisted one of her stockinged feet about to try and bring freedom to a ferociously strapped leg. "And another thing is, she's wore me out." Degsie joined Peggy on her chair and waved his tail under her nose. Peggy moved her hand along his back, the carbuncles of her knuckles bouncing along the knobs of his spine. "Aye, you and me, Samson, we're getting used to each other. But strangers is another matter. I tell you what, I think we should treat ourselves to a cup of tea." Peggy pushed Degsie's bottom and he dropped down onto the floor. While Peggy trotted into the kitchen and felt about for the kettle, Degsie sauntered into the bedroom and got up onto the windowsill. When Peggy said cup of tea, that usually meant she would warm a little bit of milk for him and drop a Malteser or two in it to melt. He stretched out a hind leg and started nosing through the fluff in his groin. As he worked methodically to and fro, he looked like a cat with serious intentions, but all the while he was thinking fondly of the gaggingly good treat that lay in store. Suddenly, without forewarning, a large wheeled beast turned into the street. It trundled past numbers 1 to 3 and stopped, plonk, in front of his window, entirely blocking out the light. It had a grey cylindrical body and a trunk that lay over its back. Degsie froze with his leg in the air. His eyes hardened like beads. He hoped fervently that the beast couldn't see him through the net curtain. A man climbed down from the creature's head. He took 2 metal rods and heaved the drain cover up at the edge of the pavement. He unhooked the animal's trunk so that it moved about freely, and then plunged it down the hole that had been revealed. He gave a shout, and immediately the beast let out a mad roar of pain. Degsie toppled backwards off the windowsill, shredding the net curtain as he fell. With difficulty, he righted himself. He shot across the living room, executed a handbrake turn to get into the kitchen, and sprang onto Peggy's chest. By now the gas kettle was screaming. Peggy toppled backwards. She fell hard onto the work surface next to the sink and folded in half like a piece of cardboard packing. "Oof," she said as she slid to the floor. Degsie still clung to her cardigan, and he stayed there with his legs like rigid tent poles while the kettle continued to scream and blackcurrant jam flowed out of Peggy's head. After a bit, the kettle stopped its din and made small explosions instead. Degsie released his hold on the cardigan and tiptoed to the bedroom door. The grey beast had gone. He crept under the blue valance of Peggy's bed, hoping for security, but the chill near the floorboards drove him out. The house was possessed by the ticking of its many clocks and the hissing of the gas fire, but there was an absence of Peggy. He went again to the kitchen, where there was a peculiar smell from the cooker. The jam was no longer flowing from Peggy's head, but a large black patch had appeared at one temple and spread around one eye. Her mouth was open in a taut and breathless "Oh." Degsie stood still, only his tail twitching. He weighed up the situation. Time, he concluded, to cut his losses.